What people don't realize is the concept of the uncanny valley. And the uncanny valley is not applied a lot to learning, and I think it'll start to. But basically what it says is when an object is not at all like human, you will accept it. As it becomes more and more human, your acceptance gains in it and you'll be more motivated to interact into it. But there's this point where the object is almost human, but not quite human, and your engagement plummets. And I think AI is going to fall once again right into that valley where you're doing a coaching session and they can share empathy or they can share interactions and they're almost human, but not quite enough that it creeps you out and you disengage. And that's my concern with going down this route of coaching. And the same thing falls with the avatars, right? If we're using AI generated avatars, are they close enough to human or not? Because we've been driving to this, how can we get more and more human state? And we're not there. So I think that's my concern.
Keith, it's really good to have you today. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you over the past few weeks. I know we didn't get to meet each other at the conference recently, but I'm really glad we get to chat about your, expertise and experience as a learning professional.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We've had some great conversations and I'm excited to talk about some topics we have on the slate for today.
Well, why don't we dive straight in? One of the things that really struck me in our initial conversations is how intentional and thoughtful you are about learner motivation, right? In a learning experience to get people to really want to learn. And so actually that's one of the areas I would love to dig in.
For sure.
Maybe we can start by just defining motivation in the context of learning. How do you define that?
I think my view on motivation in the context of learning differs than from what a lot of people say, right? Everybody's looking for engagement, but you see them chasing engagement in so many different ways. Oh, we need social or we need this particular tool or something like that, where I look at motivation in the sense of who are they as a person? What motivates them on their own, right? I don't want to force motivation. I don't want to fake something up, oh, here's your pizza party, right? That's always the joke going. But look at that learner of who you are as a person outside of work. Because what happens with people is they'll do what they have to get by at work, but outside of work is where they chase their passions, where they engage in stuff. So if you can find out what engages them in that area or in the intrinsic motivation piece of it, where you don't have to bait them, you're feeding what they inherently are motivated by, then you get the motivations that you're looking for in your learning.
Got it. Interesting. So much more around really like human motivation and what gets people to just do something like on their own.
To do anything, whether it's training or go for a run or wake up in the morning, right? That's what you're looking for. You're not looking for anything beyond that.
So how do you then break down different drivers of motivation? Like, do you use psychology literature on that? Or how do you think about it?
So a lot of mine is based in the research done by Stephen Rees, and it was a concept that was used. It's been used in a wide variety of areas. I know it has a great application in professional sports and other sports, but it takes these key indicators of 14 different motivational drivers everyone has. And a lot of research has been done on that area there, and that's how you measure it. So typically, the formal way to do is to give someone a Rees motivational profile assessment, and it will tell you where they line up with their motivators. Are they high power, high vengeance, high beauty, high independent, and things like that? But after a while, once you work with people, I've learned that there's no need to put everybody through this assessment, because just having conversations with people or understanding the culture of the organization they're drawn to, you can make some pretty blanket assessments on what they're motivated by. And is it 100% accurate every time? No, but I think you can get close enough to pique at least some of that motivational drive in them. And the psychology of it is different than, the DISC profiles or the other ones out there that say you're either this or that. On DISC, you're either a D or an I. You can't be both. And the truth is, that's not how the world works. It's very much, I might be some of this and I might be some of that. And that's the beauty of looking at this type of motivation, is just because someone's not motivated by group work doesn't mean that some degree of them is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, how you have to look at motivation is everybody falls somewhere in the middle on a lot of things, but you're focusing on the outliers. Not to get too mathematical, but standard deviation, we've all seen that. We're looking at the outliers that are on either the far right side or the far left side of standard deviation. So if you're highly motivated by group work, that's great. That's what we're going to focus on. Or you might have a high disdain for group work. Okay, we know not to go there. But the outliers are outliers. So if you find that your group does trend more to that right side of being motivated by it, chances are the people in your group that aren't highly motivated by it still have some shift to that side of being motivated by it. Your ROI may not be the same as that person who's off the charts motivated by group work. But that's the beauty of this approach is it's not a black and white this or that. No one ever said that chocolate ice cream is the exact opposite of vanilla ice cream. We've made that assumption, but it's not true. So I think that's how you approach it is looking at it. It's not a this or that type scenario.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is oftentimes when you started with the conversation, you said a lot of learning teams sort of reduce motivation to just engagement or a certain like tactic. Well, I think what I'm hearing is you tend to look at more what seems to actually drive a certain cohort of people or individuals and then tailor it a little bit to fit their motivation. Now, the challenge of that is, of course, it's pretty hard to do at scale. It's easy to do in like a small group setting, but in like as you add the number of people, it becomes increasingly difficult to do that kind of tailoring. Can you help me understand how you think about operationalizing sort of the way you think about motivation in a large organization?
In logical theory at scale, it would all just go down straight down to the average in the middle, right? And you're like, well, we're just designing for everyone. But I think if you take a closer look at it and you look at why people join your organization or look at why people are there, you can start to find at least some of the commonalities, right? So if you work for an aspirational organization that wants to help make an impact in the world, I would say a decent amount of the people there are driven by high idealism. They want to make the world better. That won't cover everyone, but that will cover a large portion. If you're working in an organization that typically pays higher than the rest of the industry, best to bet that a lot of people are probably driven by money. If you are in an organization that is in a different culture, there's also things, vengeance in Western culture is usually viewed as a negative thing. But if you understand the vengeance is not always a negative, and in certain cultures it's a positive, you know how to tailor to that culture. Same with honor. A lot of cultures place higher emphasis on honor. So while you can say, oh, it's straight down the middle, it's really not. You can play to certain cultural norms or certain organizational norms that explain why people are there. So yes, there's some ones like people motivated by food. That's a hard one. That is a motivator, but that's a hard one because you are down the middle on that. But there are key ones you can pull out and go, yes, I know people are motivated by this. Let's lean into that a little bit more. Yeah. And that's how you try to scale it, is look at those commonalities that stand out.
It really does resonate actually in the sense that we are a tool that does this like live group-based learning, and we've definitely seen certain organizations or certain functions really like this modality versus not, and I can actually kind of start to draw out why certain organizations, people who tend to join those organizations or people who tend to join certain functions will resonate with our modality more versus not. By the act of choosing to be in that path, you've already revealed some of your preferences around what motivates you.
Well, I fully agree. And if you have organizations that value that collaborative type work, but you can't scale ILT to that big of an area, a tool like yours works perfectly because you can still have a way for people to come together and collaborate without straining your entire system or trying to have 30 offerings around the world in one day, which will tax any organization. So I think that's where you can look at organizations and go, hey, they really like this method. Let's find a solution to provide to them that they can have that motivation.
Really interesting. Okay, so I hadn't quite thought of it in this sort of organizational culture lens, but it's very cool. Now, I think in your experience, and I'm curious, can you give some examples of how specific organizational culture or setup drives the way you design learning programs that are highly motivating? And I would love some examples that are far from each other so people can hear how do you tactically take that insight into learning program that works.
Yeah. So I worked at one organization in the past that is in the heavy duty trucking industry. And what's crazy about it is they are a small company in central Illinois to the point where they call their headquarters Silicon Valley because it's in the middle of cornfields. It's literally 25 miles off the interstate in a small farm town, population 1,500 people, but they're also own 65% of the market share worldwide. So that's just mind blowing in itself. But this company, because it's small, Midwestern type organization, the company was a family. Everybody was family. So there were a lot of inside jokes. You can kick your feet up on, the COO's desk and have a conversation in the middle of the day. So we had to create a training program per our mandate of harassment training every year. And nobody likes harassment training. Let's be real. And it was a very artistic type culture. People were very abstract. So what we did was we took a two-pronged approach to motivate them. The first was the easy route, which we created a simple e-learning program, because when it comes to harassment training, sometimes that's the easiest way to check it off the box. But we knew that people wanted fun. They were, myself included, self-described nerds. They like comic books, they like things. So we literally made a comic book that motivated them. And it had the realistic scenarios. And we worked in the inside jokes that people make jabs at each other all the time on it, and that engaged them. But what really took off with us was then also a lot of people were board game fanatics in our group. Small town, not much to do. So you play a lot of board games. So we created an actual harassment board game for people to play. We used inspiration from Clue, but we made the board game look like when you were going around, it was divided up like the corporate office. So the floor plan was the same on the board. And the key people in the game were actually named after people within the organization. And it motivated people because, one, they had that connection to the family environment and taking the jabs, but also we touched the connection to the organization of the layout, but it also tapped into what these people do in their free time. We did a lot of research. We talk about learning personas a lot, but so many learning personas were lacking. If you look at a standard corporate learning persona, all you see is, oh, they've been with the organization 2 years. They want to move up. They have this type of degree. We took our learning persona to a level of, what do you do in your free time? What do you collect? And that's how we discovered people were in love with board games at our organization. And that brought a whole new motivation to the point to where instead of learners taking this program begrudgingly one time, every time we had like a team meeting with the organization, we busted out the board games and people played it and loved it. And people were learning way more than they really needed to by compliance standards, but people knew it because we tapped into that need of what they like to do.
That's a really incredible example, and that's so creative. Let's take an example that's on the other extreme. That's a little bit probably more commonly encountered by a lot of learning leaders that might be listening, which is they are in large organizations. People are generally pretty busy. They struggle to get people to engage in typical learning content that they produce. In a setting like that, how would you maybe help me understand what steps you would take to ultimately get to designing the right learning approach, and maybe an example of something that has worked in a context like that for you in the past?
Yeah, so I think at the bigger scale, obviously with scale becomes complication. That's a given in any aspect of business. Anytime you scale up, it gets complicated. The biggest challenge that we faced when we were building a larger example of it, say in a project management training course that we had, was that so many people were set in their ways. So that's an initial barrier you have to reach. And so many places are going to fight you because each area does their own way.
Right.
In each area, like at the small organization, we had that one culture. Throughout the organization, you have multiple cultures. There's not one singular culture for the group. So the way we approached it, one, I'll tell you, is we went rogue, more of ask for forgiveness, not permission, and started mapping new stuff out, and then came to people and said, hey, what do you think? I think if you spend a lot of time in an organization asking permission to go this route or to do engagement, you're going to get pushback because you have one side say, we're not motivated by that, and another side say, oh, but we are, and then you're stuck in this middle ground. So first, take the jump, take the initiative to go out ahead of it, and know that it may fail, but you may see great success. So what we started by doing at our organization for project management was, one, understanding who the learners were all the way around. That was difficult for us in project management because we had the project managers. We had the people that do it day in and day out that are like, we must do it this way. But we had the people that just like, I just want to know what this project manager is talking about when I'm in a meeting. I don't know what agile is. I don't know what you mean by capacity tracking. So we definitely gather that information covertly from all areas of the organization. And then we started to build those personas out. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to build those personas out properly. And once we started to build those personas out and asking them questions like, what do you do in your free time? My favorite is, if we gave you $1,000 and one day to spend it, what would you do? The disclaimer on that one is you have to change that dollar amount based on who you're talking to, because to some people, $1,000 is, yeah. And, to other people, $100,000 is that number. But as we asked these questions, we started to get this picture of the entire organization. And then we started to map it. So this group is here, this group's here, where's the similarities? This group's here, this group's here, where's the similarities? And we built out the persona of the entire group rather than an individualized person. So originally we had, oh, this person's starting their career. Oh, this person's a people leader. We built one persona because at the end of the day, when you're designing at scale, even if you have 5 personas, that same training is going to all 5 personas. So build that one. And from there, we started to say, okay, now that we have the commonalities, like high idealism was a big one for us. we started to craft motivators like a narrative that was very high idealistic. It had higher goals to it. And that's the process we want to. Once we identified that, we can go back to then game mechanics that rely heavily on that we have a massive list of and say, okay, now that we have this, what type of mechanics do we need to incorporate in this learning so that people will engage with it? And that's where you start to see the process. And the project management program did evolve into a largely successful program because people who even knew what was going on so locked into, say, this narrative, or so locked into this competition piece, or so locked into, well, they didn't know why they were locked in, but we tapped into it, that it didn't matter anymore that we weren't following the strict rules that this particular group had in place, or we weren't following the culture norms that this group had into place, because we understood what went beyond that level with our learners and could tailor the game mechanics or just some of the elements of the course to that group. And as certain groups would start to lose off engagement going through it, we'd hit them with something that hit them. You have these different groups, but we're spacing out the engagement motivators so that, yeah, this section might not motivate them, but the next section is going to hit them hard. And then they're immediately back into engagement. So when you think about engagement, it's rarely this straight line or this straight upward line. With a learner, it's kind of like this wave of, oh, I'm engaged, oh, I'm not engaged, oh, I'm engaged. And you have to have those waves at the right points to keep them engaged before they just close out the program or completely tune you out. I think it's more of a guessing game. I can't tell you, hey, you have to hit their engagement every 5 minutes. I think a lot of times when we see those statistics, they're inaccurate. It's a trial and error. And figure out how often do I have to do it. So be ready to fail.
Super fascinating. You've thought a lot about different levers that drive engagement. And from what I can tell, very creative ways to create learning experiences that go beyond the traditional methods that people are used to. Can you share some of the different learning designs or levers that you have to drive engagement and get people really involved that you've seen work really well often?
Yeah. I wouldn't say we go outside of the normal delivery methods very often. I think you're naturally constrained by the tools you have and what you can do. So I'm still heavily using e-learning, curated content. I'm still heavily using ILT, VLT, etc. But I think what makes it stand out is the wrapper you put around it. Instead of giving them 5 e-learnings and saying, oh, here you go, we might craft a story. So going into the first one, you have that preface of what's going on. And then you give, okay, in the first one, you have to accomplish this task to achieve this. And then they go into an e-learning that might be curated that doesn't actually follow the narrative, but it's getting the information you need. Then after that e-learning, you craft the next narrative to drive it further. So you have to wrap it. You can't just give them a list of e-learnings if you're using something you're not self-creating and give it to them. Now, if you're self-creating, you can build that narrative all the way through that one e-learning and it'll carry it. I will say the little joy that I have that works all the time, but it has to fit the right scenario, and this is a very small, minor mechanic in there, it is the countdown clock. I love and I'm obsessed with countdown clocks. And the reason why is because the psychology behind it's way more complex than anyone will ever imagine. So if I just put a clock in the corner, I can tell you why it's there. I can tell you why it's not there. If I tell you why it's there, then okay, you know what's going on. So it might be counting up and saying you have 5 minutes to finish this, or it might be counting down. That has very different actions on your psychology. Another advance is that you can just put the clock in the corner and have it count up and not tell anyone why it's there. That's a whole different motivator because everybody's going to take that differently. Some might be like, oh my gosh, I have to hurry through it. Others might be like, yeah, I don't care. Or others might be like, what's going on there? So to me, that's my fun little thing that I like to play with here and there, because there's so many different directions that it can go versus like a leaderboard. Everybody knows the purpose of a leaderboard. But that countdown clock is so obscure and can be used so many different ways that people are always almost engaged because they don't know what it's doing.
The element of ambiguity and surprise that you're adding.
And the count up with no instructions by far I've seen is the most powerful, because people will put their own rules around it and try and figure out.
Tell me more. Tell me more. Like, how would they? Yeah, think about it.
You know, you'll see people when you put the count up clock, they view it certain different ways. They know it means something, even though it may actually mean absolutely nothing. But you'll have people like, oh, I need to be engaged because what if at 5 minutes it kicks me out of this course and I'm given a quiz? What if I didn't get far enough through? Or what if I'm rushing and I don't have the information? Other people might be like, great, well, now it's going to be measured against all my peers on how much time I spent in this course. So I need to make sure I spend it. But then they're like, well, what if I don't spend enough time in the course? But what if I spend too much time in a course? And you find people that really balance that middle ground of actually engaging, because they don't want to be the last person to finish the course, or they don't want to be that person that opens the training and leaves it open and walks away from their computer. And now they're at 45 minutes on a 10-minute course. But it balances that out with them trying to understand what that dynamic is.
That is
And
so fascinating,
I
actually.
will say one of the most controversial things I will say, and this might get some flack, so be prepared for the comments, is training is inherently manipulative. And people take manipulation as a bad word, and I see why. But in essence, you see a state that someone's not achieving that you want, and you apply levers and pressures on them to get them to the state that you want or they need to be at. With that, we have an ethical responsibility to not take it too far. But especially when you're working in the psychology space, you are privy to information that they are not. You know how to pull levers and move things and get them to move to where you want, that learner's not aware of you're doing in the back end. I talk about the countdown clock. You still have to be very ethical and conscious about how you apply things like that because you do have more knowledge on how the brain works or how you're driving people that they may not know. That's a challenge you have to balance of when you use it and when you don't.
That's interesting. The example you gave of the different sort of ways in which drive engagement, you took it to a totally different direction than I expected, but I thought it was fascinating. I guess a question for you, what do you think are the most common pitfalls you see that most L&D teams fall down to when they design learning programs such that it just doesn't drive the engagement impact they want?
The most that I see people facing is we have to get it done. So they go with your default words on the screen. We all know as L&D professionals that's never going to get engagement, but that's the nature of sometimes chasing deadlines, and it's the nature of the world we live in. The more trend that we can control is chasing trends. So many people will see a new shiny object and chase it instead of sitting back and thinking about how this impacts the bigger picture. We've seen it with points, badges, and leaderboards. We've seen it with VR. I consider myself on the cutting edge of L&D. I embrace a lot. I jump in. I get excited about it. I'm not sold on VR. I see certain use cases for it, but for people who want to adopt it for everything, I'm not sold. And the challenge is we dive in too fast, either A, before the research has been done, or before we take the time to do the research and make sure that it actually meets what we need to do. The other side is they buy products based on the bells and whistles. And then throughout the organization, you have 12 tools that are now doing the same bells and whistles that don't speak to each other. And all those bells and whistles lose meaning because nobody can put them all in one place and say, oh, look, I've got a badge here, I got a badge here. Well, if you're using 12 different tools that give you badges and they're not in one place, they lose their value, they lose their meaning, and people aren't motivated by it. When you say, oh, let me go find that badge, and they got to go search through 12 programs to find it. Yeah. So I think those are the biggest things there that in L&D professional world people do is chase trends and the nature of let's just phone this one in and get it done.
Got it. Yeah. Also, again, resonates. Now, talking about trends, we can't escape AI. And I think it's really interesting because I think AI and motivation, I have some fundamental questions and skepticism and curiosity around it. I'm curious how you think about AI-driven learning. And there's probably different types, but let's say the common thing that people think about is AI coaching or AI avatars or whatever that helps you engage with AI instead of a human, and how you think about how human motivation plays into that, whether it plays well into it, how you can actually cultivate human motivation, whether it's possible. I'm curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So with the coaching space, I will say this is a topic that I'm very cautiously stepping into. And where most people say, well, because AI makes stuff up or things like that, that's not what I'm worried about. I mean, it's a concern. We could probably have a whole other podcast on this topic right here, Vince. But what people don't realize is the concept of the uncanny valley. And the uncanny valley is not applied a lot to learning, and I think it'll start to. But basically what it says is when an object is not at all like human, you will accept it. As it becomes more and more human, your acceptance gains in it and you'll be more motivated to interact into it. But there's this point where the object is almost human, but not quite human, and your engagement plummets. And I think AI is going to fall once again right into that valley where you're doing a coaching session and they can share empathy or they can share interactions and they're almost human, but not quite enough that it creeps you out and you disengage. And that's my concern with going down this route of coaching. And the same thing falls with the avatars, right? If we're using AI generated avatars, are they close enough to human or not? We go back to the joke of Clippy from Word back in the day. Clippy was such a success because it was not at all human.
Right. Yeah,
right. You had
animated. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And now people are worried about if we go too far to that edge of where it looks human, engagement's going to drop. That's why Clippy had a resurgence about 3 years ago, and everybody was so excited for him to be back because we've been driving to this how can we get more and more human state, and we're not there. So I think that's my concern. What I am excited about AI and L&D and the learning journey is the ability for personalized learning, and not as so much as the AI creating content as much as the AI being aware of what content's there and directing you to it. So being able to have the AI assess where your weaknesses are, where your skills gaps are, and say, this is the training you need for this. Not even so much at this course, but hey, this chapter in this course or this video embedded in this course. That's where I'm excited about AI coming into L&D and that personalized learning journey.
We're thinking almost in terms of close to more adaptive learning in the sense.
Yeah, and how AI is going to drive that adaptive learning to a whole new level is where I'm really excited about.
I tend to agree with that. I love the way you said it. I don't know if I quite heard it as before, but really resonates is uncanny valley. So the one thing that I think seems really valuable about AI is its ability to guide you to the right thing you should spend time on learning, and don't spend a whole bunch of time on things that you already know or will bore you, right? And I think that so just efficiency of that experience seems like really valuable for sure.
I think the other thing to realize if you're doing AI in that coaching environment or something like that is there's always going to be the people that try to break it. You have those malicious people that are like, oh, if I'm on a crisis counseling AI coaching, how far can I push this AI before he loses it, right? And as a designer, developer, or leader, you have to be aware of what's going to happen if they push it too far, because that can be a nightmare within your organization. Even if they're intentionally doing it and you know they're going to do it, but that spreads, then it could be a nightmare.
Yeah, it could be a real lawsuit happening too if they take it the wrong way. I guess the other thing I think about AI is your uncanny valley comment starts to hit at it. One mental model I have for learning, especially when it comes to not just like information recall, but let's say you're trying to build critical thinking and build judgment and things like that. That requires someone to put in effort, to like genuinely engage and put in effort and apply and practice so that you can push yourself. I see people being able to do it when they're with other humans and feel accountable for showing up and putting their best foot forward. I'm like really curious whether humans will genuinely engage with an AI and like spend the cognitive effort that's required to build critical thinking and skills, if that's what the training's about.
I think at this point in time, no. And I think it's coming, and I'll expand on that. I think right now, because of how quickly AI models took off in the world, and how quickly things like, GPT and Claude and all the other ones out there, people became so reliant on asking it questions. They're like, it's the new Google. Well, if you look back at history when Google came out, that's all people could do. Now, is Google largely still used as a scapegoat? Yes. But people are still thinking critically now with Google. People are still searching and digging deeper and things like that. So I think we have to reach this acceptance point where the new and shiny and over-reliance wears it off and it becomes a part of daily life so that you do get that critical thinking. Because right now, everyone's using AI to answer the simplest questions in the world. Right? They don't want to think anymore. They just do it. But eventually, once that novelty wears off, I think people will largely start going back to the norm and engaging AI the way it was probably intended to be. And you'll start to see that critically thinking. By no means am I an expert in the process of when that will happen, but I'm sure that tipping point will be there eventually. But I think the rate of AI advancing has to slow down first, because every time a new version comes out, people are drawn right back in.
It's like a playing around with a toy sort of situation.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you largely use conventional tools, but in like almost interesting designs to motivate learners. But have you run into any tools or technologies that seem really good at tapping into learners' intrinsic motivation?
A lot of it, I'm really old school on it, and I look at that broader thing. I will say there's tools that I've leveraged that help me along the way, but you still have to have that process of what particularly motivates and what levers. So I think one product that I absolutely love is called Bundle AR. Mm-hmm. Which is a AR company that use your phone, your cell phone, your iPad, something for it. And you can do so many things with it, whether it launches a video or it shows up a menu, whether you're scanning a building, you're scanning a sign, you're scanning a QR barcode, whatever method you go with. And it makes it engaging more because you can tailor that learning experience. But in itself, it's not still engaging the motivators. You have to know what type of content to put out there, what type of motivator to put out there. One fun thing is for food, make them go somewhere where food is to scan something, and that engages it, right? So you're still tying those motivators in. It's just using the tools to pull those levers or to put the levers in the right spot for them to pull. I will say hands down, the best one that I've ever seen that taps into motivators is called Blue Rabbit. It's largely a conference tool, but it can be used for training that literally is an entirely gamified end-to-end environment. So I've been to multiple conferences and helped design and host conferences that leverage it to where there's point systems, there's reward systems, there's in-game currency, there's a heavy heavy narrative. And the beauty is how that one's constructed is you can literally leverage probably every single motivator in there and still hit everyone. And it's set up to where you can do that feedback loop where you get that boost every few times on a different motivator to get people going. So I would say those are the two biggest tools that I'm the most excited about that I don't get to use as much as I like to, but they're the ones that if the opportunity arises, I dive right in.
Maybe last question for you. The context here is there's a lot of question nowadays around what's the role of L&D, like how it's going to evolve. There's so much disruption there. What's AI going to do to L&D and so on. So I just want to take a step back and ask a bigger picture question. How do you see the function evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? And what do you think is a piece of advice you might have to other learning leaders who are navigating this?
In the future, we're going to see the role of the developer disappear. In all honesty, and I hate to say it because I started out as a developer and that's where my heart lies a lot, but the person who is actually making the content or making it beautiful, putting out, is going to disappear because AI is going to be so easy to develop it that your designers are going to be able to easily do it. And in this point, I'm differentiating between the designer and the developer. The developer does the hands-on, hands-to-keyboard. The designer is shaping the learning journey, shaping the design, matching the content. But I think if you're looking to move forward and stay relevant in industry, that's where you have to shift is into that strategic role. You have to be able to think beyond the AI, what drives the learning. The AI is going to give you great examples, it's going to give you content, but what's driving it? And I think as a leader, you have to get into that strategic role right now of how are we going to embrace AI and leverage it? Because the people that stay around the longest are the ones who know how we're going to leverage the AI. And then as that AI comes in, you have to continue to evolve yourself in that strategic position that is looking ahead at what's coming next. You have to make yourself more relevant every single day. And that's much easier said than done because stuff's coming at us so fast. How do you know if you jump on this bandwagon and you're not relevant anymore because that wasn't relevant? Looking at the constant horizon of what's coming our way and how can you be that strategic partner of when they want to bring that on or when that's coming in, that you're the person they come to help guide that process. I don't think AI is going to completely replace L&D. I don't ever think that's going to be an issue, but I think we will see a smaller footprint of human capital in L&D in the future. I think it's just figuring out what's going to stay and what's not going to stay.
Do you see the function, like the responsibilities and the mandate of L&D just changing?
I think we will see the mandate is still at the end of the day human performance, right? How do we get there? In a lot of ways, L&D, maybe the mandate won't change, but we're going to have to get much better at actually proving that we've made behavioral change. Because the process below it that we used to do that most of us are entrenched in now is going to get taken over a lot by efficient processes, AI, things like that. So we're going to have to get much better at evaluating, did that change really happen? Which is an issue that L&D everywhere always combats. We have horrible ROI. We have horrible measurement strategies. Even people say we have great measurement strategies. When you go look at them, the measurement strategies are still very untangible and tied to other initiatives. We're going to have to get better at saying, yes, our training intervention drove this result because, and here are the numbers. So we're going to become more of a data organization than we are a creative organization. And I think being able to tell the story of that data is what's going to rise you above the rest.
Hey, this was awesome. I said there were multiple points in the conversation where you kind of either put a name to something that I had in the past, but like new framing or just raising new ways to think about things. So really appreciate you taking the time to join. And I'm looking forward to more conversations with you in the future.
Yeah, it's been great. And I love meeting with you and having a conversation and seeing where things are going.